Okay, welcome to part 2 of the lecture, Origins of the Cold War. I'll be moving on to the third factor on superpower rivalry, intensification. Now, by 1947, there is no longer a doubt about Cold War rivalry between the USA and the USSR. Okay, this cartoon very clearly shows. Okay, you have the bear represented by the USSR, the eagle represented by USA, and you can see that they are in a face-off against each other. And if you look at the captions, irresponsible statements, deepening suspicions, that is really a lot of the Cold War. A lot of the Cold War was the result of statements made by either parties, that caused the other to deepen suspicion, as well as actions taken. Right? A lot of the Cold War always comes back to these few words: tensions, suspicions, misunderstandings. Okay, all of these are keywords when we are describing the Cold War. So now let's see the first one, Truman Doctrine and the Policy of Containment. 22nd February 1947, George Kennan, who was a senior diplomat stationed in Moscow. Moscow is part of the USSR, is in the capital. So basically, this senior diplomat, he sends a 8,000 word telegram to the US Undersecretary of State. What this means is just that the US diplomat who was stationed in Russia, having been there for a few years, has his observations. So he's supposed to report back to the US on what he's seen, what he understands the USSR to be. Now, can you just pause the video and take a look at this? Try to absorb what it is that he's trying to say about the USSR. Okay, let's look at this. Okay, the USSR still lives in antagonistic capitalist encirclement, which in the long run, there can be no permanent peaceful coexistence. What it's trying to say is that the USSR still believes that it's being encircled, it's being surrounded by capitalist states. And therefore, there cannot be any permanent peaceful coexistence. So what George Kennan is saying is that the USSR does not believe it can peacefully coexist with capitalist states. In foreign countries, communists will work towards the destruction of all forms of personal independence. So they're saying that all communists in every country will always, their main goal is always to work towards the destruction of all sorts of independence. Everything possible will be done to set major Western powers against each other, impervious to the logic of reason. So what it's trying to say is that the communists will do everything that they can to turn the Western powers against each other, to cause them to mistrust each other, impervious to the logic of reason, meaning they don't listen to the logic of reason. The communists, they do not listen to reason or logic, but what they do respond to is the logic of force. For this reason, force means power. Okay, for this reason, it can easily withdraw, and usually does, when strong resistance is encountered at any point. So what it's really saying, this diplomat has analyzed the USSR and said, this is a party in which if you try to reason with them, you will not get through. They will not listen to you. But if you use force, they understand and they will withdraw. Imagine, I have a student. I may talk to him for 2 hours, 3 hours, and he still doesn't hand in his homework. But the moment I threaten force, I will strip you with 1 afternoon of attention. I will call your parents. I will confiscate your phone until you give me your homework. That is called force. In those moments, the USSR will withdraw. That means they will give in. Okay, I'll do as you say. Okay, so you need to understand that this really shaped the way the USA view the USSR. Before this, they may not know how to deal with the USSR. Harry Truman, the US president, he doesn't know what approach to take with the USSR. But with George Kennan's long telegram, it changes the way he thinks, that he's relying on the intelligence provided by his diplomat, George Kennan, and George Kennan has told him that the only way to deal with the USSR is that you cannot be soft on them, you cannot use logic, but relentless battle must be waged. Okay, socialist means communist. That means we must continually use force against them. That's the only way to deal with the USSR. So you need to understand that this long telegram goes a long way in shaping the way Truman views the USSR. So, altogether, these circumstances shaped Truman's belief of a need to take a strong stance against Stalin. Firstly, you have the long telegram, okay, what George Kennan told him that shaped his belief that he needs to be strong against Stalin. At the same time, there were certain events happening in two countries in the world, one in Greece and one in Turkey. So in Greece, there was a civil war between the Greek Communist Party and the Greek Royalists, basically two opposing groups, okay, or a group opposing the communists. Basically, they're fighting for control of Greece. The communists are fighting to turn Greece into a communist state. So this shapes Truman's belief that he needs to be strong against Stalin because communism is on the rise all over the world, as in Greece. In Turkey, Stalin is trying to gain influence by installing a communist government so that he could gain access to the Turkish Straits. So Stalin was trying to support a communist government to come to power in Turkey, specifically because he needed some access. Turkish Straits, I think, refer to the a certain route that is quite useful for trade, okay, or whatever reasons, or strategic reasons. So basically, Truman sees communism on the rise in Greece. Truman sees Stalin trying to forcefully put communism in Turkey. And this matches up with what he's heard from George Kennan in the long telegram, that the USSR will continue to spread communism aggressively in the world. So because of that, Truman makes a speech known as the Truman Doctrine. As part of this Truman Doctrine, the USA provides money, military equipment, and advice to democratic countries perceived to be threatened by communist influence. Part of this Truman Doctrine is the Greece and Turkey Aid Bill, where the US basically gives $400 million to Greece and Turkey. Now, this is the beginning of a policy of containment against the USSR. That Truman and this Truman Doctrine and Truman, they are trying to contain the USSR, stop the USSR from growing in power, stop them from spreading communism. Okay, now let's listen to the speech that Truman has made.
Before America's Congress, President Truman makes the most momentous speech since the death of Franklin Roosevelt.
Wait, sorry. I'm not sure if you can hear it. Just give me a moment. Okay.
Before America's Congress, President Truman makes the most momentous speech since the death of Franklin Roosevelt. He declares political war on Soviet Russia. In American eyes, Britain is no longer the bulwark against communist expansion.
Great Britain finds itself under the necessity of reducing or liquidating its commitments in several parts of the world, including Greece. As in the case of Greece, if Turkey is to have the assistance it needs, the United States must supply it.
Okay, so he's considered.
We are the only country able to provide that help.
From now on, it means that anti-communist America will make its influence felt in European affairs.
If we falter in our leadership, we may endanger the peace of the world, and we shall surely endanger the welfare of this nation. Great responsibilities have been placed upon us by the swift movement of events. I am confident that the Congress will face these responsibilities squarely.
Truman points the way to a new foreign policy. Timed to coincide with the sitting of the Moscow Conference, the speech means that the United States now faces up to its international responsibilities. America has decided that her true frontiers are in Europe.
So why this was so momentous is because the Truman Doctrine is a new direction that the USA is taking in terms of foreign policy. Before this, the USA has an attitude that we don't really want to interfere in the affairs of other countries, right? They want to remain isolationist. They don't want to interfere overseas. But Truman Doctrine marks a new direction to say that now, as part of our foreign policy, we need to be concerned in what is happening overseas. The reason being, the first part of the speech, it says that Britain used to be what we call a bulwark against communism, that Britain used to be the one resisting communism, but now after World War II, they are weak. They can no longer do this. And because of that, the USA is the only country left to be able to resist communism. Okay, so that's the justification for the Truman Doctrine. So after the Truman Doctrine, okay, in the same logic is the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan was announced. It's an economic aid plan of 13 billion put into helping European economies recover. Okay, so they would give food, machinery, animals, etc. to be shipped to the democratic countries in Europe. The goal of this was so that economies could recover and bring about prosperity so that people would not be attracted to communism. Okay, we talked about this before. It is generally poor countries or poor people that are attracted to communism because communism promises equality. It promises food for all, work for all. Such equality are attractive to people who are suffering, who do not have food, do not have jobs. But communism is not attractive to those who are rich and prospering. Because those that are rich and prospering, that means that they own private property. To be rich means that you're accumulating money of your own. Communism does not allow for that. Communism does not allow you to accumulate money. If you have accumulated any money under communism, communism will take your money that you have accumulated and give it away to the poor so that everyone is equal. Okay? So Truman's logic is this. If economies grow and they recover and they prosper, they will not be interested in communism. So this was his plan to stop communism from spreading in Europe. Make them rich so they are not interested in communism. Specifically, you can see that the countries that have received this aid, okay, its closest ally, Britain, France, Italy, West Germany, the Netherlands, the Dutch, Greece, Austria, Turkey. So they were trying to prevent communism from spreading in these countries. Now, of course, if Truman does this, Truman is basically saying, I'm containing the Soviets. I'm trying to stop the Soviets from expanding. You will expect a reaction from the Soviets. Okay, so pause for a while, read the source and see. What does this source tell you about the Soviet reaction to Truman's policy of containment? Okay, look at this. Now, the Soviets view that this policy of containment is a form of expansion, of enslaving the weakened capitalist states of Europe and their economy. So they're basically saying, you see, you're giving money to all of these weak capitalist countries. You are enslaving them to yourselves because they are in your debt, therefore they are like your slaves. And when you are collecting slaves, you're basically expanding. You're growing your influence. Okay? It has chosen to hatch new war plans against the USSR and new democracies. The clearest evidence of this is the Truman-Marshall plans, imitating Hitler. The new aggressors are using blackmail and extortion. So basically what they're saying is that the Truman Doctrine and Marshall Plan, when you give money to these countries, you are really just blackmailing them and extorting them. That now I give you money, but you have to follow everything that I say. You have to be my lackey. You have to be my slave. Okay, the Soviets are not happy about this. So, Stalin viewed the Marshall Plan as the USA's way of tying Western Europe to itself. Okay, similar to how the USSR controlled Eastern Europe. So the USSR has Eastern Europe, USA has Western Europe. Now the difference is, the US did not need a defensive buffer zone. Meaning, Stalin is saying this, USSR, we control Eastern Europe. But we need this. We are controlling because we need this. For our safety, for our defense, we need this defensive buffer zone. It's a need. But what the USA is doing is that they are trying to expand. They are interested in Western Europe not for security reasons. They're interested in Western Europe for aggressive, expansionist reasons. Because the USA is on a different continent altogether. Remember the map. The USA does not need Western Europe as any sort of buffer zone. It has no defensive reason. But therefore, if it's not defensive, then your action must be aggressive. So Stalin is saying that the USA, you are interested in Western Europe because you are trying to expand your influence. You are no different from Hitler. You are trying to take over more countries and grow your influence. In fact, Stalin viewed that since your action in Western Europe is a form of aggression, this is only the first step. Anyone who's aggressive will not stop. You have no reason to stop. In fact, the USA will eventually advance into Eastern Europe. So Stalin views the USA almost like a second Hitler. You want to grow your influence, you want to invade countries, you want to grow the power of your country. And eventually, once you're done with Western Europe, you will come into Eastern Europe, which is where the USSR is. Okay, so because of this, Stalin was very suspicious of this policy of containment. Stalin also suspected the USA's attempt to help Germany recover was so that Germany could threaten the USSR again. So if you see here, the USA has given money to West Germany. So Stalin views that this money given to West Germany is so that Germany can become strong and Germany become Germany, which is geographically USSR's neighbor, will be able to threaten the USSR again. Okay, you can see that Stalin really does not trust what the USA is doing. And all of this intensifies the Cold War because it deepens mistrust. Okay, keywords again, it deepens mistrust. I hope that whatever I'm saying, you are writing it down. All of these are explanations, else after you finish viewing your lecture, if you don't write, you will fall asleep halfway through the lecture and you would have learned or remembered nothing. Okay, so now that you understand Stalin's view of this policy of containment, what is the outcome? The outcome is monkey see, monkey do. Whatever Truman does, Stalin replicates. So, Stalin sets up the Cominform, which is an organization that includes the leaders of the communist parties of Eastern Europe. Basically, all the leaders of all the communist parties in Eastern Europe, Romania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, all of these countries, the leaders will have to join the Cominform. Now, the Cominform will gather together and have meetings. At these meetings, Stalin will instruct them to ensure that they implement a Soviet-style communism. That means your country must be communist. You must follow the way the USSR implements communism in our country. You must replicate the same system. You are also only allowed to trade with other Cominform countries, and you are not allowed to take money from the USA. You must reject Marshall Plan and any other money or trade from countries outside of the Cominform. Okay, so the goal of this is to control Eastern Europe and basically turn them into satellite states. States that are highly dependent on the USSR. That's what satellite means. Okay, because when you control who they trade with, it means that you control who they are dependent on. If the Cominform countries only trade with each other, it means they are dependent on each other, they're dependent on the USSR. Okay, so because of that, if they're dependent on the USSR, they have to listen to the USSR. That is a form of control. Next, Stalin also sets out the COMCON, which is the Council for Mutual Economic Economic Assistance. So it promises economic benefits to its Eastern European countries, similar to that of the Marshall Plan for the Soviet states. It also allows for COMCON members to trade with one another. But the reality is this. Unlike Truman Doctrine and Marshall Plan, where the USA really just gave a lot of money to other countries and benefited them, COMCON really benefited the USSR more than it did the Soviet for the rest of the Eastern European countries. For example, okay, when the COMCON forces members to trade with one another, it means that, for example, Poland was forced to sell its coal to the USSR at 1/10 the price it could have sold on the open market. So under COMCON, Poland can only sell its coal to the USSR. It cannot sell to any other countries. So let's say the USA may have been willing to buy coal from Poland at $100. But USSR says, you cannot sell to the USA, you must sell to me, and I will only buy it for $10. Okay, that's what it means. It means on an open market, you can sell for a particular price. By not allowing you to sell there, you must sell to me, and it's sold at 1/10 the price. So the USSR, you can see that the USSR is using the COMCON in order to benefit itself. Okay, but at the same time, some of you might ask, why? Why will Poland be so stupid? Because Poland has no choice. The leaders of Poland, the Communist Party, they only came into power in Poland because the USSR helped them to power. So if these leaders decide to say, no, we refuse to sell to you, USSR will just send their soldiers in, kick you out of the government, and put in a new set of communist leaders who are willing to sell coal to the USSR. Okay, so they had no choice. So let's put it all together. Here again, we look at the colored map. We need to see how the superpower rivalry is intensifying because they each keep taking actions that provoke each other. Okay, you have your long telegram and policy of containment. This, of course, pisses the USSR off. Okay, you have Iron Curtain speech, which against the USSR says, wow, you just gave a speech that separates me from you. Okay, Truman Doctrine, wow, you are openly trying to say that you will give money to other countries to stay away from communism. You will give money to fight against me. You will give money to contain me. Okay, all these other events. Again, remember, Stalin is interested in Turkey. They want Turkey. And then now USSR is purposely giving money to Turkey to stop them from becoming communists. Okay, as well as Marshall Plan. They are giving money to all of Europe to stop them from turning communist. All of this is seen as provocative by the USSR. And the USSR creates its Cominform, as well as its COMCON. Okay, so all of this causes the USA to feel that, wow, now you are forcing all of the Eastern European countries to yourself. Okay, so you see, this whole thing results in, okay, oh sorry, yes, you have your salami tactics. The whole thing results in the Berlin blockade, which is the first Cold War conflict, right? When you have tensions that have been accumulating for so long, so many different events, it is time for the first square off. Okay, the first conflict. Now we recall, under the Potsdam Conference, okay, firstly at Yalta Conference, they agreed to split Germany up into 4 parts. After the Potsdam Conference, they agreed to split up Berlin, the capital of Germany, which is in the Soviet zone, into 4 parts as well. Okay, so I always say it's a pizza in a pizza. Okay, so in early 1948, USA, Britain, and France, they decide that let's combine, you see, now there are 3 zones, right? They decide, let's combine our zone into a tri-zone. That means let's combine it together because it's easier to run it together rather than each of us running our own. Now, okay, they also introduced a new currency. Why they did this is because they wanted Germany's economy to recover. It's very expensive to maintain the zones on your own. Because to maintain a zone means that you need to supply it with money, with resources, etc. So because of that, if you combine, it's easier to manage and there are less resources used. So they also wanted Germany's economy to recover so that Germany can be an ally against the USSR. So obviously, Stalin looks at this and says, no way, you want to play like this, right? Okay, let's see. So Stalin was outraged that the 3 of them were rebuilding Germany to threaten the USSR. And he said, okay, if you play like that, let me show you what I can do. Remember, Berlin is still deep in the Soviet zone. For them to control, in the past, for the Allies to be controlling their western zones in Berlin, they have continually been sending resources in from their zones into West Berlin that is deep in the Soviet zone. So in order for West Berlin to function, okay, in order for this tree to function, Britain, France, and USA needs to get resources to that. They need to continually send resources there. So the Soviets said, okay, watch. Stalin begins the Berlin blockade. You need to send resources there, right? I cut off all rail and road links from the Allied zones into West Berlin. Let's see how you are going to survive if you cannot get any resources there. Okay, water and power supplies were also disrupted. Now, how did the Allies overcome this? Okay, there are a few options. There is a blockade. You could storm the blockade. Okay, a blockade means that Stalin will set up barbed wire, a wall, and set up soldiers there and say that you cannot pass through. So one of the options is this. USA can take its tanks and roll through the blockade to reach Berlin. But when you roll through the blockade, you will have to shoot down whichever Soviet soldiers stand in your way. And when you kill Soviet soldiers, that is an act of war. It will result in war. So USA says, no, I don't want to go to war. So they needed to find another solution. This was found in the Berlin airlift. Since I cannot go through the blockade forcefully, since the land routes are cut off, I will have to go by air. So they found that they could fly supplies into West Berlin. Now, of course, when they can fly supplies into West Berlin, it's up to the USSR. You can choose to shoot down those planes. But if the USSR does that, it will be the USSR that is the aggressive party. That is an act of war because you shoot down their planes carry US soldiers, you kill US soldiers. So both parties are very clear. They do not want to be guilty for starting war. So USSR does not shoot down the planes. And for nearly a year, an airplane touched down at the airport of West Berlin nearly every 30 seconds to deliver supplies. Eventually, Stalin sees that, okay, Berlin blockade is not working, and he lifted the blockade. Okay, but now, let's take a look at the video.
Hello and welcome to History Bite, and today we're going to be talking about the Berlin Crisis of 1948, an event which included the Berlin blockade and the Berlin airlift and could have led to open conflict in the Cold War. Into four parts after the war began to change. The western parts controlled by Britain and the USA had united their zones in 1947 to form Bizonia, and with the addition of France's zone in 1948, they'd formed Trizonia. Stalin had felt left out, and because of rising tension, had determined that the best future for Germany was one in which communism acted as the ideology which unified Germany. In this way, Stalin could make sure he could extract all of the resources he could from Germany, therefore making sure it never rose again to threaten the USSR, and also rebuilding Soviet economy. So Stalin decided to hatch his plan. Berlin itself had been divided into four parts at Potsdam into the same four zones that Germany had been split into. But where Stalin held the advantage was that Berlin lay completely within the Soviet sector of Germany. Stalin knew that the Western occupied zones in Berlin were therefore vulnerable because they were completely surrounded by Soviet territory. What made things even easier for Stalin was that there were only two land routes or corridors into Berlin from Trizonia. If Stalin was somehow able to cut off these corridors, perhaps he could stop Western supplies and communications from reaching their zones. This might starve or alienate the people of Western Berlin and put pressure on the West to hand Berlin over to Stalin completely. With the German capital under his control, it would only be a matter of time before communism could spread throughout the rest of Germany. It wouldn't be long, Stalin hoped, before all of Germany then fell under his control. So, in June 1948, Stalin actually decided to cut off all land routes into Berlin from the Western Allies' side. This included all roads, canals and railways, and this became known as the Berlin blockade. In doing this, Stalin was hoping to prove to the West that a divided Germany wouldn't work. From Stalin's point of view, the West would then certainly buckle under the pressure, which would be a huge propaganda victory for him over them. However, President Truman was not a man to be easily challenged. The previous year, Truman had made a speech to the US Congress in which he had committed the US to proactive intervention to stop the spread of communism to new countries not already behind the Iron Curtain. So Truman had no intention of allowing Germany, with its vast natural resources, to fall to Stalin. Berlin would be where the US would dig its heels in and not budge. So in order to counteract Stalin's blockade, the US came up with a plan, the Berlin Airlift. Truman may have been willing to stand up to Stalin, but he also wasn't stupid. He knew that trying to force supplies through to Berlin by land would be extremely dangerous and might constitute an act of war, so a decision was made to fly the supplies to their western Berlin zones. This way, if Stalin had tried to shoot down the planes, it would make him the aggressor. Not even Stalin would go that far. So the Berlin Airlift, also known as Operation Vittles, had begun. The US flew coal, food and other supplies into Berlin. It was a huge risk, with pilots risking potential death if Stalin decided to shoot the planes down. The West Berliners came together in a cooperative spirit to receive the supplies, even going so far as to build a new airport at Berlin-Tegel. And everyone did their part. Ordinary citizens got stuck in and helped to unload the supplies, providing the support to all that was needed. And so it was that for 11 months the US managed to fly thousands of tons of goods every day, as were the British from their sectors of Germany. So, after almost a year of the Allies finding a way to get around the blockade by flying supplies in, Stalin had been put under pressure and he decided to lift the blockade. The airlift had miraculously worked. What was truly amazing was that there had been no casualties at all, and the people of West Berlin had been able to hold out against the threat of possible starvation. So the...
Okay, so you get the rough idea.
Hello and welcome.
Now, ultimately, if you look at the Berlin blockade and the Berlin airlift, the USA and the USSR were both very careful. They both did not dare to really attack each other. Okay, you look at the USA, there is the atomic bomb. Okay, so Stalin is very clear. If I drag them into war, USA may use the atomic bomb against me. At the same time, the USA also knew that Russia is developing its own bombs. Even though they may not have an atomic bomb yet, war with them is very costly. Okay, the USA has just entered World War II. No one wants another war. So because of that, both of them were very careful not to have any reason for the other party to go into war with one another. Okay, so we look at the Berlin blockade. Basically what happened after the Berlin blockade is that Europe was now officially divided into Western and Eastern Europe. Okay, Berlin is divided into West and divided into East. Germany was also officially divided. Okay, after Berlin blockade, USA, Britain and France, they combined their zones. This is called West Germany, also known as the Federal Republic of Germany. Okay, and the Soviet, their zone, they renamed it East Germany, also known as the German Democratic Republic. Don't ask me why they named it Democratic, okay, but this is just the name of it. Okay, so altogether you see that after the Berlin blockade, it is very clear. It is no longer four parties, Britain, France, USA, USSR. It is a very clear East and West divide. Another impact of the Berlin blockade is that soon after, the Berlin Wall was constructed. Now, basically, what was happening is that the Berlin Wall blocks off all crossing points between East and West Berlin with a single point known as Checkpoint Charlie. So you see here, West Berlin here, East Berlin here. Okay, the part in red is where the Berlin Wall was built. So it's basically the Berlin Wall is built all around West Berlin. Now, the reason is this. In West Berlin, supported by the USA, was generally became more liberal. They were richer and there were a lot of life was better there. Okay, because in the West you have freedoms. So all the things like you have movies, you have nightlife, you live a life. But in East Berlin, a lot of these things were banned. Okay, books were not allowed, movies, film, etc. All of this was not allowed. living conditions were also quite poor in East Berlin. Okay, so everyone wanted to go to West Berlin to live. So there were actually many people who left East Berlin and went to West Berlin. Some of these people were important people, like your scientists, your engineers, skilled people. Okay, so the USSR was losing a lot of key personnel because they were defecting over to West Berlin. They wanted the better life in the West. As a result, the USSR decided, I cannot lose all of these people to the West, because once they make it to West Berlin, remember West Berlin has roots to the rest of West Germany and eventually the rest of Europe. So people would escape East Berlin by going to West Berlin and then moving out to the rest of Europe. So because of this, the Soviets built a wall around West Berlin so that people from East Berlin could not cross it. Okay, guards were stationed at the checkpoints to prevent East Germans from defecting to West Germany. Another impact, okay, of the Berlin blockade was the creation of NATO. So after Berlin blockade, the USA and its Western allies see that, okay, we are now at threat by the Soviets. Look at what the Soviets did. They put in place a Berlin blockade. What else might they do next? Okay, so because of that, we need to rally together and defend ourselves against the Soviet. It's based on this idea of collective security. If one member is attacked, all of us will go to war. So the USA stationed its troops in bases in NATO countries all over Europe, especially in West Germany. This was NATO. It's a military alliance. At the same time, monkey see, monkey do, USSR creates the Warsaw Pact, where USSR makes a military alliance with the rest of its Eastern Europe allies. Same idea, if one member is attacked, all will go into war. The USSR troops also stations its bases in Warsaw Pact. In Warsaw Pact countries, at the same time, the Soviet soldiers, by stationing your soldiers and bases in these countries, also means that if at any time there are any protests against communist rules, my soldiers are also there to stop any of these protests and ensure that the Communist Party is in charge. So you can see that the local Communist Party in all of these Eastern countries, they have to listen to Stalin because they are Soviet soldiers in their country. If they don't listen to Stalin, Stalin will just get the Soviet soldiers to throw these members out of the government and put in a new Communist Party that's willing to listen to them. This is how Stalin controlled the Eastern European countries. Okay, so let's look at this. Again, after the Berlin blockade, you have all of these. They just built on and on each other. Okay, West Germany. Okay, in 1949, this is when the Soviets have their first nuclear bomb. And then from here onwards, they really cannot have war with each other. Because now that both have nuclear weapons, if you fight a war with the opposing party, you will definitely lose. Lose in the sense that even if you bomb the other party and they are destroyed, you will also be destroyed when the other launches a bomb against you. So there cannot be any outright war between the two parties. Okay, then the rest of the events. Soon next you will learn about the outbreak of the Korean War. Okay, which was the first proxy war, right? So because of nuclear weapons, they decide that, okay, we cannot fight an outright war, but we will battle it out in countries overseas. Okay, let me just share with you one of my favorite movies. Okay, last I checked, the full movie is available on YouTube. Okay, this is one of my favorite movies that is placed in the period of Cold War, because in the Cold War, CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, basically the USA spy agency, they were only created as a result of the Cold War. Okay, so you have all the spy and cool stuff, my favorite stuff, part of the Cold War. Okay, so this is situated during the Cold War. You can see this is the in 1957,
we are
part of the
engaged
Cold War.
in a war. This war does not, for the moment, involve men at arms. It involves information.
Something important has come up.
We've got a Soviet spy.
We want you to defend him.
I'm an insurance lawyer. I haven't done criminal work in years.
Have you represented many accused spies?
This will be a first for the both of us.
You should be careful.
People are scared of this man. He's a threat to all of us.
Do you know how people will look at us? The family of a man trying to free a traitor?
Everyone deserves a defense. Every person matters.
So basically, the lawyer has to defend a Soviet spy.
From this moment forward, you will not refer to the U-2 as a reconnaissance aircraft.
Now, this is one the U-2. What you heard is one of the. It's a very iconic airplane used for intelligence. So the U-2 is a plane specifically known as a reconnaissance aircraft. That means they are used to spy. So the only role of this airplane is to fly over the USSR and take pictures of the USSR. That's how they spied on the USSR, one of the ways.
You're going to be taking pictures over Soviet territory.
And now basically the Soviets took down the U-2.
Tell me what happened.
They got our spy pilot with a head full of classified information. We've got their guy. We want you to negotiate the swap so it's not governments talking.
You could prevent a full thermonuclear exchange with the Soviet Union.
I'm talking to you about the security of your country.
Where do they want this negotiation to take place?
East Berlin.
Just tell me that you're not going to be in any danger.
Okay,
Give
so
me
then
something to hold.
basically, what they are going to do is that the USA has a Soviet spy. The Soviets have a USA spy, the pilot that they shot down, and they are trying to exchange these spies.
You're doing this for us.
Okay,
There are only a
this is
few
true
routes left to
event,
the east. Rule of law is less firmly established over there.
It is a
Just
true
avoid
event. Basically, the USSR did shoot down a U-2 plane, and this nearly led to war. Because remember, shooting down an enemy plane is an act of war.
interaction with people generally. You don't belong.
We need to have the conversation our governments can't.
You're an American, you could well be detained. Definitely stay away from the wall. Cross it and you'll be
Okay,
shot.
that's the Berlin Wall.
There are a lot of people who doesn't want this exchange to ever take place.
We're not leaving them here.
Things have started to fall apart.
There's a cost to these things. A cost to both your country and your family.
We need this to be an exchange.
Okay, this is the bridge where they exchange the spies. So the Soviet spy walks over from one side and the USA pilot walks over from the other side. If I'm not wrong, that could be one of the checkpoints, one of the links between the two areas. Okay, so one of a very good movie, and this is why I love learning about the Cold War, because it helps you understand these movies in ways that non-history students cannot. They cannot appreciate the context behind this. Okay, so check this out. I hope you can find it on YouTube. Okay, that concludes the second part of the lecture. Thank you for listening, and I hope that it gives you a clearer idea. Remember, now that you've cleared both lectures, can you go back to the first this long list and again look through, ensure that you really understand every term that is on this list. Okay? Thank you for tuning in.